I've done well over 10,000 interviews as a recruiter of 25 years. And what I can tell you is there's one question that you need to be able to answer, one skill that you need to be able to have that will set you apart from 90% of the people you're interviewing. What is that question? Stick with me. I'll tell you next. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you the question that we need to be able to answer, and then I'm going to walk you through how I answer that question when I'm being interviewed and why that's important. All right. Now, before we do that, I need to ask you a big favor. Hit subscribe, hit like. You'll get to see these videos when they come out more often if you hit the bell icon as well. All right. Perfect. Let's talk about the one question. The question is, tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself. Now, you may think that's a really easy thing to do, but it's really not. The tell me about yourself question is important because it's your chance to take over the interview. It's your chance to take control and to tell them what you think is important based on what they've asked you about up to this point. All right. So tell me about yourself is where you get to tell the story of you. And being really good and really succinct at telling the story of you is a skill that not many people have. And what I want to do is I want to show you how I do that. As an interviewer, I've seen people who are good at this and people who are bad at this. People who are good at this have a much better chance of moving forward. As a person who has been interviewed, I've used this to get me jobs in some of the biggest companies in the world. Cisco Systems, JP Morgan Chase hired me with this method. I was hired into Accenture using this method. These are the skills that are required in order to work in the big companies of the world. When someone says, tell me about yourself, what I'll say is, let me tell you the story of me. I'll just follow my resume. If that's okay. You've got a copy. I've got a copy. We'll use that as a roadmap. And I'm going to start at my oldest experience first and work my way to present time. And then you can ask me questions as we go along and we can go from there. What this allows you to do is emphasize the skills and capabilities that you have that relate to the job that you're interviewing for. Remember, every job's a little bit different. So you can adjust each one of those skills a little bit, and you can highlight the things that are important for this person to know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my resume and walk through this with you. I just did a download of my LinkedIn profile in order to do this. And I'll put it up on the screen behind me and I'll talk to it. And we'll start from my oldest experience first. And what I'll say is you probably need about 10 years of experience unless there's something valid from before that. But what I typically will do is say, well, I was a recruiter for a long time. I started out as a recruiter way back in 1998. And I was recruiting independently. I was in agencies. I worked for some consulting companies. And I did that for a number of years until I got to my first big corporate job at Cisco Systems. And I was at Cisco Systems for 8 years. I was there a long time. And that was in 2007, I left Cisco Systems, but I was there for a good long while. Now, my time at Cisco was some of the best times I've ever had. I started out as a recruiter. I worked there recruiting technology professionals. I recruited salespeople during that time. I did a lot of work with those teams and got to know it really well. And at some point, I started shifting into technology. We were building our own applicant tracking system at the time. And there wasn't a web-based applicant tracking system back then, believe it or not. And I was the project manager. They put on this thing. While I was there, I got my MBA, and my MBA's focus is in project management because that's where I was spending my time. And that served me very well ever since. I ultimately became head of operations for all of recruiting at Cisco Systems by the time this was said and done in 2007. Then I moved to Accenture. I finished my MBA and I was like, man, it's probably time to take this degree for a spin and see what that's all about, see if I can get a raise. Turns out an MBA gets you a nice raise. And I got a nice increase when I went to Accenture. And I was responsible for helping new people that are outsourcing their recruiting to Accenture move on to their services. So you see, I'm calling out the really high level things here. But then I'll say, this is my first time I got to be a leader of a large team when I worked for an Accenture subsidiary called Avanade. So I call in my leadership experience, my management experience at that point. So I'm good at working with lots of people. I'm a consultant. I've done a lot of good things. Later, I went back to Accenture, the main mothership company, and I did some more work working directly with clients who were big consumer packaged goods companies like Kimberly Clark, and then some big brand companies like Levi Strauss. Those are the places I worked. Even Best Buy at one point was one of my clients. And then after a little while, I went to a company that was a staffing company. They did recruiting for a living. I thought I might want to work for a place that does recruiting for a living in Randstad SourceRight. And I was there for another 5 years, 11 months, call it 6 years. And notice I have big chunks of time that I take when I go to these places. At Accenture, I was running technology and analytics, and that's what I'm really good at. I'm great at technology and analytics, and I spent a bunch of time there. And we did quite a bit. We acquired monster.com during that time. We did some work to automate parts of the recruiting process. And then my teams were responsible for big chunks of recruiting while I was there. Eventually, I left there, went back to Accenture for a little while, but that was during the pandemic. It was a little strange at the time. We weren't doing all the things I had hoped we would do. And JP Morgan Chase called me and asked me if I would head up their recruiting technologies along with sourcing, the people who go and find candidates for them. And I said, sure, I'll go do that. And I did that for 2 years. I really enjoyed working inside of a company where that's all they do is recruiting. So my time at Accenture, my time at Randstad, those were both really good times for me. And I decided to leave JP Morgan Chase after a couple of years and go back into a dedicated recruiting company in Cielo Talent. Now at Cielo, I'm responsible for technology and analytics again. That's also where I do that. And I do sourcing. I go and find candidates. Now, this has given me tons of opportunities. I've done lots of things that have helped me to build my career. I've been able to publish lots of articles. I've patented things through my employers, through Accenture in particular. And it's allowed me to grow my career quite a bit. And I think that I'd be good in the role that you're talking to me about right now. Here's how I can be of benefit to you. And the next step, after you point back to those jobs, is to say, let me tell you how this experience fits with what you're looking for. And I would talk about, remember this thing at Accenture I talked to you about? I think this would be really good in this space. And that thing that I talked to you about that I did at Cielo Talent, that would be really good for this part of your job that you mentioned over here. What's the most important thing from the hiring manager's perspective on that? And notice I'm trying to draw parallels and connect the dots for that recruiter. I'm saying, here's what you asked for. Here's what I've done. Let's put those two things together. And telling the story of me allows me to connect the dots for them. That's the purpose of that thing. Now, once I've connected all those dots, then it's on this to say, well, I didn't hear about this one dot. I can say, remember when I talked to you about at Accenture, I did something. Here's what that looks like. And here's a company where I did this and where I think it was really good. And I'm able to take them back to the story that I had told them. So that story is your anchor point. That story is how you drive your interviews. That's where you start. You start with telling the story of you and connecting the dots for that recruiter so that the story of you becomes the story that you can keep referencing for all of the questions they ask going forward. It's your way of taking control of the interview and creating a narrative that tells a story that they will ultimately remember. Now, there's some free resources in the description here. I'll point you to those. And those are free for you to use for a resume template and a few other things. But I want to wish you the very best of luck in your job search. I know you can do it. I know you can find that next job. I know this next interview will be the best interview you've ever done because you've focused on learning to tell the story of you.